Over my decade plus of teaching financial behaviors and analyzing personal economics in the lecture hall, I've seen countless people try and completely fail to master their own money. They download the shiny apps, they mess around with spreadsheets, they guess, and they basically just hope for the best. But as I always tell my students, hope is absolutely not a financial strategy. Welcome to today's explainer. We aren't going to just sit here discussing abstract economic theories today. Instead, we're diving into a highly practical, 30-day practicum on a methodology that forces total financial accountability. We are talking about zero-based budgeting. So let's dive right in and look at the raw data from a 30-day experiment that put this exact system to the ultimate test. Take a look at this case study hook. The author of this experiment writes, 30 days ago, I gave every single dollar I earned a job before I spent it. No vague savings category, no guessing where my money went, just zero at the end of every month between income and expenses. They go on to state that by day 30, they had found $312 they literally had no idea they were leaking. They also uncovered one sneaky habit that nearly broke the entire system. Now, that is the power of empirical observation. Today, we're going through the real numbers, the real mistakes, and figuring out if zero-based budgeting is actually worth your time. Consider this our syllabus for today. We'll start with the theory of zero. Then we'll track the experiment chronologically, looking at system friction in weeks 1 and 2, hitting the breaking point in week 3, and crunching the hard data in week 4. Finally, we'll wrap up with the final verdict. All right, let's jump right into part 1, the theory of zero. Here is the foundational equation you need to understand. Income minus expenses minus savings and debt equals exactly zero. Now, let me be unequivocally clear about this. Hitting zero doesn't mean you just go out and spend all your money until you're flat broke. It means you assign it all. Every single dollar gets a very specific job before the month even begins. Whether that job is buying your weekly groceries, paying down a lingering student loan, or just sitting securely in a high-yield savings account, that dollar has a strict directive. This equation forces total intentionality, and it exposes your financial blind spots with absolute surgical precision. To really appreciate how this works, we need to compare it to the standard advice you always hear. Ask yourself, why does a broad percentage-based guideline like the famous 50-30-20 rule often fail the detail test for so many of my students? Well, it's because it operates from the top down. 50% for needs, 30% for wants, 20% for savings. Honestly, it's a blunt instrument. Zero-based budgeting, on the other hand, is a bottom-up assignment. You're building your financial architecture brick by brick. The whole reason our test subject chose this intensive method for their 30-day run was precisely because this bottom-up approach completely eliminates that dangerous, vague savings category where money just inevitably gets lost. Moving on to part 2, let's look at what happened during weeks 1 and 2, system friction. In the first 2 weeks, the experiment required building a structure using a simple spreadsheet broken down into 5 essential categories. You've got needs, wants, savings, debt, and then crucially, number 5, true expenses. This last one is exactly where most students of personal finance fail. True expenses are those irregular, non-monthly costs that always feel like a sudden emergency, but actually aren't. Think annual car maintenance, property taxes, or holiday gifts. Zero-based budgeting demands that you take that inevitable $800 car repair bill, divide it by 12, and give those dollars a job every single month so you're ready for it. But almost immediately, our experiment ran into some resistance. And I love this because it brilliantly illustrates how unpredictable human behavior complicates nice, neat economic theory. The very first sign of system friction wasn't a massive, irresponsible purchase at all. It was actually the simple failure to log small, everyday cash transactions. A coffee here, a quick tip there. When every single dollar is supposed to have a pre-assigned job, unlogged cash completely throws the entire equation off balance. It's basically the equivalent of a data leak in a computer program. But that meticulous tracking led straight to the first major revelation, $47. Now, this wasn't money they were actively out there spending. This was $47 a month just evaporating into totally forgotten digital subscriptions. Because the system requires you to justify every dollar right at the start of the month, these zombie subscriptions were aggressively forced into the light. It is a perfect textbook example of how a bottom-up system forces transparent trade-offs. Which brings us to part 3, week 3, the breaking point. This is where, in my experience, about 90% of these financial experiments just fall apart. By the 3rd week, the nice theoretical model collided violently with real life. So I pose this question to you. What actually happens when the system breaks? Because trust me, it will.
No matter how meticulously you plan everything out, an unexpected expense is going to manifest. Maybe it's a medical copay you didn't anticipate, or a tire suddenly blows out on your morning commute. This is the exact moment that tests the rigidity of the budget. Does the practitioner just throw their hands up and abandon the entire 30-day experiment, or does the system adapt?
Well, you see, zero-based budgeting isn't just a passive tracking exercise. It is an active, real-time decision-making framework. When that unexpected expense hits, the system forces a transparent trade-off. It's the classic concept of robbing Peter to pay Paul. If you suddenly need an extra $100 to fix that flat tire, your equation still absolutely has to equal zero at the end of the day. So you have to actively open up your spreadsheet and pull that $100 from somewhere else. Maybe it's your dining out fund or your clothing budget. The system doesn't break, it bends, but it forces you to acknowledge exactly what you are sacrificing to cover that emergency.
Let's move into part 4, the final stretch of the practicum. Week 4, the hard data. Entering the final week, all the emotional turbulence of week 3 finally settled into hard empirical data. When we compare the end-of-month reality versus the start-of-month projection, we can clearly see the specific categories that ran over budget, which necessitated those trade-offs we just talked about, and the categories that ran under budget, which allowed funds to be successfully saved or reallocated elsewhere. This right here is the true beauty of the methodology. It provides a highly accurate postmortem of your monthly behavior, giving you completely actionable data for your next 30 days.
And here we have the resolution to the hook that started our lecture today, $312. Through the sheer act of intentional allocation and totally ruthless tracking, the experiment revealed a massive financial leak. The specific culprits in this case? Dining out and those impulsive last-minute rideshares. However, the offer also included a very honest admission. Their discipline did fail on several occasions. There were days the tracking was totally ignored and impulse buys definitely slipped through. But because the system always resets to zero, those failures were contained and quantified rather than just swept under the rug.
And that leads us to our conclusion, part 5, the final verdict. It's time to evaluate the entirety of this experiment. We've seen the theory, the friction, the breaking point, and the data. So, is this methodology universally applicable to everyone? The objective truth, derived from both this specific source and my own decade of teaching this material, is that zero-based budgeting is incredibly powerful, but it is for sure not for everyone. It's an absolute game changer for individuals with irregular income, anyone hyper-focused on aggressive debt payoff, and first-timers who really need a dramatic reset to finally understand their spending habits. Conversely, it's not ideal for people who vehemently hate detailed tracking. Seriously, if just opening a spreadsheet gives you hives, the friction here is going to be way too high. You would honestly be much better served by a lighter, automated, percentage-based alternative.
But look, if you take away only one single principle from today's explainer, let it be this. Zero-based budgeting does not restrict you. It simply tells you the truth about your money. It strips away all those comforting illusions we constantly tell ourselves about what we can actually afford, and it replaces them with cold, mathematical reality. It is a mirror, not a straitjacket. Now, if you're curious and want to run this experiment for yourself, we've linked a free template in the description below to get you started. I'm going to leave you with this final, highly provocative thought from the study. A budget you abandon by week 6 isn't a system, it's a diet. Financial health, much like your physical health, requires sustainable long-term habit changes, not temporary starvation tactics. So reflect on your own habits. Are you actually building a robust system, or are you just going on a financial crash diet? Keep that in mind as you review your accounts this week. And make sure you subscribe, because in our next explainer, we are going to be tackling the great debt debate, the snowball versus the avalanche method, and mathematically proving which one gets you debt-free faster.